So I represent a company called United Breweries. We have a very boring life of making beers and selling beers. We have about 14 brands in the country. And nearly every second bottle of beer is manufactured by us. A lot of you contribute to our success. So we are a joint venture with Heineken, and that's not what I'm here for. I think I'm taking the liberty of using my nearly 3 decades of work experience to share a few things. When I started my journey, there weren't any such events which used to happen. And if I look back, one of the reasons why HR fraternity is so very well networked and so many events happen, I think one of the prime reason is technology which binds us. So we look forward to initiatives like this, come and seek agenda, look at one bright idea which we can go back and implement. Back 2 decades, finance used to be the function which used to be looked up in the organization because they use the technology most, which isn't the case today. Today, the CIOs really struggle to keep pace with the kind of things HR managers want to launch in the company. And therefore, I think what technology is provided to our profession is giving that seat on the table in terms of having a say in the agenda of the organization. And it's through the various platforms that you use. So for example, we have SAP, which is represented by Shraddhanjali in the panel. So we use SAP for our payroll, for our core HRMS. We also work with PeopleStrong for our hire to retire. We've got many other platforms. So we work with Percepio Skillsoft for our e-learning platforms. We work with Stepathlon on our wellness function. We have Simpliance. And therefore, the life of an HR manager has really changed from earlier managing transactions and running the operations to a very complex understanding of multiple platforms, and they don't talk always to each other, and therefore you've got to juggle with a couple of balls at the same time. And that's made the function more agile, more adaptive, and I would also say more forward-looking than some of the other functions in the organization. And therefore, these things have provided the HR folks back at the corporations a very strong understanding of business and very good understanding of technology. So my advice to people who are at a learning curve, and there are, of course, many veterans in the group, is if you embrace technology and make it your strategic edge, I, for example, moved into this job from Xerox, and the revenues of that company are equal to the HR budgets that I run in this company, and I've been able to cope up with the demands of the job only because, you have technology on your side. And if you don't make it your friend, you will struggle. The 2 things that I want to leave thoughts with this audience really is, one, the first one is make innovative use. And I'll give you an example. All of you use different kinds of platforms for wellness. We use one called Stepathlon. It's a 100-day journey which companies compete with each other. Within the company, there are teams which compete with each other. So what we've done innovatively is that we've merged it with our CSR. We have 21 breweries, factories, and at the same point on the same day at a given time, everybody steps out. So the workmen get very enthused that the managing director is also taking a walk somewhere in the Cubbon Park while he's taking, measuring his steps for an hour somewhere in and around the breweries that we have. And we then measure the counts, and there is a correlation to what we contribute to a cause. And this is enabled only because there is the platform of technology which is available. So I think every one of you uses core HRMS, use multiple kind of technology platforms. But if you apply a little bit of thinking and creativity, these can, really stimulate a lot of excitement in the company. The last piece, which is, based on my personal belief, and that's why we work with multiple platforms and not just one single platform, is that always test any technology that you want to introduce on a very simple dipstick, that technology should be made to work for people and not the other way, that you make people work for technology. And the day we use this dipstick, we will be very judicious in bringing in the right kind of platforms to our workforces, and we owe it to them that technology should come and help them do their jobs better. So that's what I had to share now. I would hand over to Shraddhanjali.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, okay, good. Okay, since I woke all of you up, if I can have my slides on, please. We've spoken a lot about digital transformation. So digital transformation has made constant the change, right? There's so many fundamental shifts that are happening in our business models that, business models are getting re-engineered faster than we ever imagined. Yes, HR will have to go digital. We have the opportunity to reimagine work, we reimagine structures, our practices. That's said and done. But if I have to articulate, I believe if technology is at the heart of this digital revolution, human experience is going to be its soul. And what do I mean by that? As mankind, we've survived a lot, right? We have an evolution history. We've survived more than anybody else. But every point in time that we were faced with a challenge, when we did our best, is when our potential was before and above everybody else. What I mean is, in this economy, we're going to be asked a lot of technical questions, a lot of moral questions, a lot of ethical questions on how technology can be used and should be used. But technology is an enabler. It is not your solution. The human experience is the solution. And the way we say it and the way we build this into HR are three fundamental principles. What you see here is simplify. I think there's a lot of crib about HR, right? It's not the easy to transact. Let's get that out of the equation. Let's standardize. All of us would have done phenomenal events in our journey as HR professionals, creating wow experiences, that one-off one, which we couldn't sustain because the CFOs never gave us budget for the next year, right? Let's stop doing that. Let's talk about standardizing. And the third is keeping the customer at the heart and center. We need to have a personal touch in HR, but have it where it matters. You don't need HR professionals from XLRIs to answer employee queries. We all know that. I think we've moved away. There are chatbots in the conversation. We have something called a SAP Copilot. It's a digital assist. It not only gives me answers like a chatbot, it actually does things for me. So if I want to apply leave, I just tell it the way I tell Siri to book an Ola cab for me. So there are a lot of these elements that are coming through. But what I would like to focus for the next 5 minutes is examples of how SAP has used technology, has embedded it to make the experience better. Personalizing. Imagine if I told you that I don't look at you as a resource or an employee. I look at you as the authentic person that you are. I recognize you for your strengths, and I make sure you have a fabulous career irrespective of what the company wants today. Wouldn't you want to stay? Wouldn't you go out of the way to work for that organization? And that was our thought process when we said, we will recognize everybody as a talent. You have unique needs. Everybody in this room has a different circumstance, a different life stage. Can I give you that benefit? One benefit fitting everybody's need is a thing out of the window today. We created flexible benefits which meets the needs of multi-generational workforce. We have people. You can use it from Fitbit devices to superfoods to taking elderly care, parental care. You can take care of personal development. So there's a whole range that's made available, but it's only possible because we created a digital platform. An employee, as Manmohan said, is the enabler, is making the choice. So we are not making it as HR people. We are saying we give you a platform and technology allows me to do that. I think health was spoken about. health is getting even more important than ever before, right? It's not physical health. It's the emotional well-being. It's the mental health. And these are elements of how to talk about it. In Indian society, we're still very cautious. We believe our uncles and aunts are probably the best psychotherapists, right? Best therapy people. We don't actually still go out and say, I need somebody to talk to. How can we break that thinking and mentality? We created platforms which give people anonymity, but encourage them to participate, collaborate, challenge each other on physical events for sure, but also on mental wellness, on emotional wellness. Personalized learning, I think there's a lot that's being spoken about. We've clearly moved away from looking at careers as ladders. So if you were a developer, senior developer, what trainings can I do to move to the next level? That conversation is out of the window. We're talking about a career of a web of experiences. What can help you? Today I'm doing this. Doesn't mean that's what I want to do going forward, right? What other additional experiences can I gather? And typically most companies have with them a career ladder and training programs to meet the needs today. We have something where I as an employee can say what I want to do, I aspire to do in future roles that may or may not exist, and my learning recommender actually pulls in that as well. So it's not just for what I need to do for the next couple of years, but what makes me at my best, run at my best. The one that I love the most is all of this is only possible if you build a culture of inclusion. And this is not because we as HR people will build for policies that will make people feel recognized and rewarded. Inclusion happens with everyday decision making. Hundreds of decisions that you and I take for every employee in the company. And this is where technology can play a role like no other. Because no matter how many training programs I go through, I am biased. As long as I'm self-aware, I am biased. And I don't let that influence. And that's where technology can play a role. What we have is something called business beyond bias. There are 6 questions where we ask, where the technology uses machine learning to improve, to detect, proactively detect, and remove bias. Who applies to us? Who we hire? How we manage? Who we develop? Who we promote? Who we reward? And who we plan to exit. These are all questions all of us go through. But how can technology support us? I'll give you small examples. The first one, there are 60 words, if included in a job description, women will not apply. Imagine the technology telling you that and giving you a choice of what else can you include so you have a gender-balanced pipeline coming in. Photo-less calibration. We all get influenced. We've gone to a stage where we remove the photos in the calibration exercise because somewhere in there we don't want that to influence anything. They still say that, right? In America, if your CEO is 6 feet and above, 90% chances that he will be hired, right? We want to remove that. I can't add 6 inches on me, so I want a fair chance. We have alerts that tell us during our compensation planning for somebody who's come in from a maternity break or a long leave, when the manager, because to avoid recency effect, the manager saying, you know, if you've put in a number, the system tells you, are you sure this person was not there? You can still override it as a manager, but you are the person who's taking that call. So technology is truly helping us. The last example that we did, and it was a bit of a cultural shift for us, all the companies have positions which you open internally and externally. We typically do it for full-time roles. Going with the web economy and gig economy, we've opened all positions, internal, external, part-time, fellowship. Any employee of SAP around the globe can see in our talent marketplace what's open, what can be applied to, if it could be made available virtually. So if you're not willing to travel to that country, how can you participate? It creates transparency and empowerment beyond anything else. And as closing thoughts, it's no longer the strongest, or even the fastest, or the most adaptable who will lead this. In today's context, it will be the people who will create the change, and the only people who can drive the change are humans ourselves. So as a room full of HR professionals and leaders, it is our duty to experiment, invent, and make things that we are proud of. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Girish. I represent Ola. Most of you here must have experienced Ola as a consumer. As an organization, we aspire to become the world's largest mobility solutions provider. Being third in such a forum typically has the disadvantage of you being quite repetitive on some of these points. But nevertheless, let me try to give a perspective from a unicorn or a startup standpoint. Let me start this conversation by asking a simple, interesting question. How many of you here recognize this tree over here? Show of hands, please. Yeah, it's a Chinese bamboo. And for people who are not aware of the speciality of this particular tree, this tree takes about 4 years to nurture before you actually have any kind of green shoots coming up. But when it does, it's just about 3 to 4 weeks before it completely shoots up to the size of a full building. And the reason that it's able to do so is because it's got its foundation, its networks completely in place before the kind of growth really happens. And the reason I'm actually bringing this right now up is because I think it's one of the most apt metaphors for any startup in India, which means you develop a product, try to ascertain the product market fit, you get the kind of funding, and then you expect to grow exactly like a Chinese bamboo. Now, from a human resources standpoint, most entrepreneurs, if not all, typically start taking human resources seriously when it comes to a Series B or a Series C round of funding, which means that you don't have too much of room in terms of getting your foundation right. And technology becomes extremely critical if you have to do the catching up. It's not about just using technology, but it's about harnessing and leveraging it the right way, which becomes extremely critical. What I'm going to be sharing over the next few slides is a blend of learning, thought models, of frameworks that you may already be aware of. But then it's the amalgamation or the combination which has proved successful for us as an organization in terms of some of the initiatives that we've taken up recently. So I like to call it as a DEFT. So the 3 pieces that we're talking about, how do you start, even before you start rolling out technology, how do you keep the employee at the center of these experiences? Can you start with design thinking, which is nothing but employee experiences? Question some of the fundamental assumptions using first principles, and then bring in technology to generate superior employee experience. And I'm going to quickly demonstrate a couple of use cases in terms of how we went about applying this. The first one was how we ended up actually revamping the employee benefits proposition at Ola. Like most startups, our total rewards proposition was completely structured around transactional compensation. We did have benefits which had a bit of a skeletal structure. There was a lot of clamor for actually increasing the number of benefits. But if you look at the utilization of the existing benefits, it was quite low. It rings a bell, right? 10 to 15% was the kind of utilization that was there. Now, by applying this framework, we were actually able to completely increase the utilization to up to 60% and a mammoth ROI in a very, very short span of time. How did you go about doing that? First and foremost, we went back to the employees to ask specifically, what is it that really appeals to you? Amongst various things that we heard, 2 things really stood out. The first one being, you have certain benefits today, but is it really relevant to me? And the second thing is the accessibility factor, which means it's quite cumbersome for me to go and avail of some of these benefits. The crux is that most of the millennials actually ended up seeking customized offering rather than what you can offer as a policy. So we went about looking at various options that we have. First and foremost, we thought of, like Shraddha mentioned, something like a flex bin, where you will be able to sharpen and offer a fair bit of variety to employees. But then we actually started questioning as to why do we need to be selective about this entire thing? Is there a way we can actually offer the entire gamut of benefits to employees? What are the constraints that we have? Then we realized the main constraint that we have is that of cost. Now, how do you go about solving for the cost? Which means, can we offer co-pay models or should we offer discounted models? Discounted models appeal to us the most. But for discounted models to work, we need scale. Now, at 7,000 employees, 6,000 employees, is that scale really sufficient? If the answer is no, how do we actually leverage the ecosystem, HR tech ecosystem, where people actually have that kind of a scale and the kind of tie-ups that we're talking about, which can give pre-negotiated benefits for our employees. And that's when we actually struck upon an idea of actually having a lot of these reward and recognition platforms who allow your employees to redeem most of these benefits at most of their vendor partner tie-ups at a pre-negotiated deals. We went back and said, can you strip out the reward part of it and just offer us the deals to our employees? And before we realized, within 2 weeks, we had around 10,000 brand deals across the country for our employees in 2 weeks. We had solved for relevance, but then how do you solve for accessibility? One, first of all, we ensured that it was completely accessible on an app, and more importantly, we started nudging using GPS, which means that every single time you're near a particular brand or product or a service that's offering discounted deals, we started sending push messages using GPS, which actually ended up a big time embracing in terms of adoption of benefits. So if you look at this specific approach that we're talking about, this completely gave us the kind of impact that I started narrating this entire case with. A very similar case, which I want to quickly run you through, is we use the same framework again in terms of how we apply to the performance management module that we had to actually double the quality of feedback and creating a positive experience for the employees. So we had a fair bit of, like most organizations, we tried to do away with ratings, but then we said that's not the core of the problem. When we went back to employees and asked how do they experience performance management feedback, they said that it seems to be more about communication of ratings from the managers rather than actually giving us feedback or feed forward, which we can actually take back and use for our development purposes. Now, if that's being the case, we said, how do you apply first principles on it? We said, if the real problem seems to be on-ground execution, how do we actually ensure that we actually are able to give real-time feedback to the managers so that they're able to do a meaningful job? Or why does these ratings have to be a one-way conversation, like some of our employees asked? In fact, we were quite inspired by our own Ola app, where you have, most of you who have taken this ride would have seen that you give a certain rating to the driver and the driver also rates you back. So if manager can rate the employee, why can't the employee also rate the manager in terms of the rating? So by doing that, we solve for the accountability part of it. And the second thing that we also did was to ensure there's a quality of feedback that's actually translating into on-ground experience. We also developed intelligence where we looked at the kind of feedback being given using an algorithm that measures the number of words and keywords being used. And we actually ended up giving real-time feedback to managers. Now, what did this happen in? It actually translated in terms of the quality of feedback, which we started, when the cycle started, it was around 30%, which we were able to push up to 65%. And this year, we've actually had a 75% positive experience for our employees in terms of PMS process. So that's, in a nutshell, the message that I want to leave with is it's very, very critical for us to use technology. But then if you're actually able to start this entire journey, like my colleagues over here on the stage said, if you can start this entire journey by keeping employees at the center, bring about a certain degree of innovation and questioning assumptions, and also leverage technology post that, I think the impact that we can make in our respective organizations could be far more significant. Thank you.